Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video, I'll be discussing The Ruin of Kings by Jenn Lyons, the first book in the series name that I don't actually remember what it's called, I'm realizing while talking. It's something with dragons. I don't know. It doesn't say. Comment it in the comments if you know what it's called, because I've forgotten. But I've meant to get to this for quite some time. I got the first book used really cheap, and you can probably just see I actually have the next two books as well, because I also got them used super cheap. They were all basically like new and really good condition hardcovers, and so I couldn't pass it up. But I'd heard really mixed things about this book in the series in general, so I really wasn't sure if I would like it. I was really hoping I did, since I have the first three. And after reading, I completely get why I mostly hear pretty mixed things about this, because I had pretty mixed feelings as well. This story is really good, and I feel like I should have enjoyed it more, because I really liked the story at parts, but it's just kind of the convoluted, overly complex narrative choice that makes it a little bit weird. So to explain, this book starts with the main character, Kieran, who is imprisoned, and then he alternating with his captor, Talon, who is a mimic and has the power to, like, basically gains all of the memories of anyone whose brain she eats, and also apparently can just sort of read minds and collect memories anyway. And he is told by her that he's supposed to tell his story for this rock that's going to record it. And he tells half the story, starting at one point in his life, and she tells a second timeline of his life starting out before. So we switch off chapter by chapter with these two different timelines. One that's a bit earlier. They're not super far apart, but one that's a bit earlier, one that it's a bit later, and then we slowly, as the book goes on, kind of get closer from the first one to where the second one started. And then at the end, we also get some like real time where we're actually like the author's telling the story now, because it's actually happening instead of one of the characters telling it. So if that already sounds confusing, there's actually more, because there's not only that, with like each character having some like dialogue and commentary often at the beginning of the chapter mentioning things, but the story itself is actually being told third hand by someone else who was like listened to the recording on the rock and is transcribing it to send to someone else so that they can have the story like fourth hand, I guess, at this point. And so there are annotations where they like note things or like make corrections or just kind of comment and have dialogue on what's going on. And it's pretty weird. And it really bothered me at first, and I kind of got over it, and then it started to annoy me a little bit later. The way you flip back and forth basically every single chapter kind of makes it so that you don't get like tired of one plot line too quickly, I guess. But it just seems like an odd way to tell a story. I've heard the second book is kind of weird and like takes place all in one location, also potentially with a story being told. So let me know if that's the case, because I don't know if I'm going to make it through 3 books with this sort of structure. But it's kind of odd, and with you having these two different timelines, the story has to make sure it doesn't reveal anything it doesn't want to reveal, so there's some kind of like weird ways that you don't actually know things, or like in the more current timeline, Kieran will mention that, oh, I met this person, and then later we'll get to him having met that person in the past timeline. But it's very odd, and it's not, like I said, it's not horrible, and the story is actually really good. I really, really enjoyed a lot of the story with both timelines, and it was enjoyable. It was a pretty interesting world that was created. But like I said, I get the mixed feelings on this, because the overly complex storytelling device is just weird, and it does make it a little harder to get into at some points. The base kind of plot here, which so much of it isn't even revealed until much later, but Kieran is very important for one reason or another, And we find out multiple reasons potentially why, but he's very important and potentially maybe has something to do with some prophecies. And it's hard to really say much without spoiling just because so much detail is not revealed until later in the book. But there's a lot of different kind of factions going on. We're in a world that has it's most of the kind of known world is under an empire, but we do have called the Vani, which are like elves, basically, is kind of that description as well. And there's some other different kind of like types of creatures or different like humanoid or less humanoid type races as well. It's always interesting kind of having that diverse world. We've got like the nobility who actually aren't allowed to technically rule, so like they elect people to rule on their behalf. A lot of kind of confusing familial or ancestry relations that go on as well. And we spend time, like I said, in lots of different areas and lots of different groups as we're looking. So we do get to learn quite a lot about the world. Also, because, like I said, the story is being annotated. So if something's mentioned, then the annotation, the guy annotating will be like, oh, they're talking about this is that thing. Or here's like a really quick history lesson to tell that. So I don't know if maybe that was kind of the point to be able to build the world and just kind of like a way to explain things without completely like having the characters just explain it. It does kind of work for that, but I'm not a huge fan of books with annotations. I think the one exception is Terry Pratchett because his are funny and basically always jokes of some sort in his footnotes. But it's just like I said, it's still kind of odd, and I know I can't quite get off of that, but that was really one of the things that just made this a strange book. For the most part, though, it did flow surprisingly well. And so I think Jenn Lyons did a really great job with weaving this all together. It's very much meant to be mysterious and have some twists and have things not really turn out the way that you think they are, even when in some circumstances you already know how things are going to turn out. The big things I had is there were a couple of the basically the annotations or footnotes that later on, like they made a comment in the future timeline where they had already commented something different in the past timeline, and so it didn't seem to mesh perfectly. But the big thing that kept me from liking this more and rating it higher was the ending. And the ending wasn't bad. It just felt incredibly rushed and just I probably, since I've been spending so much time like picking apart the weird narrative device, the part of the story that's actually just happening in real time for the most part, I feel like I should have enjoyed more, but it just felt like it kind of jumped. We spent so long going on these two timelines, and as they're getting ready to intersect, it just kind of we gloss over some details right where they're about to connect, and then we jump forward a fair amount in time at a couple of points. After I originally thought that more time had passed between the events and realized that the timelines were actually a lot closer, but then we just kind of had some random jumps forward where we could be like, oh, now the characters know this or they've had this long to plan it, and it just kind of the ending felt a bit rushed. It definitely set up some interesting things, but it also just kind of brought up more questions than it answered, I feel like. And not only the structure, but there's a specific item that's used as a plot device several times that basically, and I'm not really considering this a spoiler. If you don't want to know anything too specific, just me talking about an item, I'm not going to say what it's called, I'm just going to say what it does. But if you don't want to hear it, skip forward about 15 seconds and it should be done. But there's a device basically that lets people switch souls. And so lets somebody's soul go into another body. And that itself makes for some really confusing things with genealogy and stuff like that. There's actually at the end, there's like a little genealogy chart. When that happened, it's specifically notated like, oh, this happened here. And it's just, I don't know, it's a bit odd. I really wouldn't expect something this overly complex for a new author either. You'd think that they'd start simpler, and so like I said, I was really impressed with how well it did all go together. But it's just it just kept me from enjoying it as much as I could have. I feel like there was a really good story here. I feel like telling it, sequentially would have probably worked out really, really well. And I didn't even mind the two different timelines. It was just kind of like everything on top of each other that just kind of got to the point where I'm like, this is a little bit much. But there was a lot of good things here too. The characters, I did really enjoy Kieran, the main character, especially. It was fun reading his POV, and you get the way it gets around having other POVs is, like I said, Talon, who at the very beginning is holding him captive, has memories of other people, and so she will tell Kieran's story through the eyes of other people around him. So that's where you still kind of get a story from multiple POVs, even though it's two people telling the same person's story. The second person is telling the same story at a different point through other people's eyes, and so that kind of broadens the scope of what you get POV wise. But I did like the characters. There were some different interesting themes and a really kind of diverse cast of characters. We didn't focus a ton on most of the other characters. The villains, though, I did think were really interesting. You definitely had a villain that was kind of all about just being evil, but they do have their reasons. And the way that in this world kind of gods work was also very interesting. And you get some history on that. I imagine that's going to be exposited on a lot more in the later books as well. But you have gods that are actual like entities and have certain powers, and you find out more about how that works. And there's also just some little asides, things that weren't even focused on that much, but like it's mentioned, for example, that the sun is very red, and there's like a magical veil. I guess it doesn't. I'm pretty sure it was specified it was magical, but it's called a veil basically that protects from the sun and the radiation, and there's a reason why the sun is like that. And so just some interesting bits there. I always like when there are little things like that, just to kind of flesh a story out more and give you more to deal with. We do hear about lots of different areas and get to see some different areas as well. A lot of the story takes place in two major locations, but we do get bits of information here and there, and some interesting scenes as well. But there are several things like gods or dragons, which there's a dragon in the cover, so I'm not saying dragons is a spoiler. That's the way I'm looking at it. And I'm pretty sure it's something about dragons. It's the name of the series. I still haven't remembered at this point. Maybe if I look at the second book. Let's do that. The second book will probably say. It literally doesn't. Okay, authors, you gotta tell me what the name of your series is. I really don't see... Okay. It literally still does not actually say what the name of the series is. So I don't feel like I can be blamed. I think somebody mentioned it actually in Discord what it was called, and I'm like, I didn't know it was called that, but I looked it up on Goodreads. So it's nowhere on the book. So I cannot be blamed for not remembering what it's called, because I only saw it once and it was never on the book. So, I don't know, maybe it's supposed to make it more complex. Could be, who knows. Anyway, I kind of lost where I was going with that. But there's a lot that kind of just, there are really interesting parts of the world. And so I thought the characters were well done. I really enjoyed the story. The story in general and just kind of following our main character through the different timelines, I thought was interesting, and it was a compelling story. Like I said, the big things were the overly complicated narrative device, the ending just feeling pretty rushed and kind of just having a lot happen at once. Felt a bit anticlimactic because we'd spent so long like building up, and then we just kind of like, we're gonna gloss over some stuff now. I don't really like that. So I ended up kind of middle of the road. Like, I liked this. I didn't like really like it, but I liked this book. It's definitely enough that I will continue the series. I'm not gonna be like jumping and throwing it up to the top of my TBR, but I did like it enough. I definitely would continue. I thought it was interesting enough, definitely to continue, but it's probably not going to be for a bit. I'm wondering too, because the thing is, I thought the book looked interesting, and then I don't know if you can see here, but on the back we've got blurbs from Glenn Cook, Ellie Modesitt Jr., Janny Wirtz, and John Gwynn, all a positive blurb. So I'm like, that's a lot of high, powerful author blurbs right there. So maybe this is one of those books that just like other authors enjoy more because of the complexity. But like I said, I did like it. It definitely had some big flaws, and I know I talked about those a little bit more, but it was an overall a solid book. And I feel like if you can get past all of the kind of negatives I mentioned, you'll probably enjoy this book. If that turned you off, it may just not be for you, because, like I said, I'm still kind of middle of the road here on the fence with this one. It definitely wasn't a bad book. It was well written, and I enjoyed it, but there's a lot of weirdness, and if that continues, it might start to outweigh the good things, so I don't know if I'll end up actually finishing the series if I don't like book 2 a little bit more. So we'll have to find out. Those are my thoughts, though, on Ruin of Kings, The Ruin of Kings. I keep forgetting The Ruin of Kings by Jenn Lyons. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like. Check the link in the description for the Wizardly Duo Discord if you would like to join and chat with us about books and everything else. And of course, if you would like to see more of my content, make sure to subscribe.